Some of the things we talked about, I'm going to stop on franchise tax as an example. Franchise tax used to be an item that would grow every year, but actually about 5 years ago, that changed, and the reason it changed was we didn't experience the same growth over the years, is primarily because, one, your legislature and what they allowed, and two, all about AT&T, because everybody had landlines, so we got paid, a franchise fee on that particular item. Well, how many folks have a landline now? And the answer to that is very few. And then consequently, all new construction, you never saw any of that. Now on cellular service, basically, cities don't get anything paid back on cellular services. The counties still do, but they get the 911 fees. And then fiber came in, and the same thing happened with that. Whereas in the past, you were enjoying the expansion of utility lines and what have you. Well, the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, have reduced that amount of money that's paid back to the county and cities. So where that used to be a significant growth year after year, that is not so much the case. In this particular line item here, over the past 5 years, the growth has been less than 1% to 2%. Local option sales tax, Banks County, is continuing to be prosperous for us. Local option sales tax loss, not a significant dollar, and yes, I'm very conservative in that number, but I like everybody else, am somewhat concerned about where we are in the economic world. If anybody wants to pencil in their thoughts, take me there, I can tell you that, yes, that is a conservative number. Premium tax, that's your insurance tax, is one of the things we enjoy as the city continues to grow, that we'll continue to enjoy that. Business license, not a factor. Permitting, significant difference from where this doesn't show you actuals, significant difference for us between what we actually did this year versus what we're budgeting, which was about $23,000, if my memory serves me right. But it was a pass-through because as well as I do, we contract that service. So if we get paid for building permits, that's a pass-through on the contracted services. Reinspection fees, not a big deal. Annexation, I'll speak to the ones that are a factor. Interest income. So we're going to have some more discussion about this, but there's a great opportunity in this past year. We were able to position ourselves to be able to draw some more interest. The market's changed remarkably, and we've actually proposed to the Finance Committee that we set aside a number of dollars in 11-month CDs so we can even prosper from that even better. And opportunities sitting at our door now, you'll hear about that in the work session. Rent on the depot was never a moneymaker. Unfortunately, it barely covers its cost, and we saw that from day one. Alcoholic beverage, rather large increase on that. Employee insurance participation, so that's a line item that we've had, but we broke that out. So let me tell you what that is, so you understand. So you have, if an employee adds their family covers, then they pay a portion of that. They actually pay 50%. And I wanted y'all to realize that's a more significant dollar amount than it ever is. So through the past 5 years, where in the past we had 3 employees that participate, we now have up to 11 employees. And then when I budget, I have to budget for what I perceive might be our total exposure on that. At the same time, we want to recognize the revenue that they pay in and towards their family coverage, because when they get their check, there's a deduction made for that. So that line item represents the deduction that they're paying, and we recognize that as revenue. Did I lose everybody when I told you that story? Good. The next item is administrative fee, utilities. So we haven't made a big adjustment in that in a number of years, and yet where's our expense? Well, it is in utilities. So that actually revenue comes out of our water and sewer fund, and that's the difference. So where we towed the line for so many years, it's just to a point where we had to back it up and get it to a point where it's paying its fair share. The idea around here is to cost us $1, we need to charge $1. Code enforcement and fines, reality is, it's not a moneymaker for many in the room. Let that sit for a second. Perception sometimes has been revenue lights adjusted at 17,000, not a big deal. Solid waste collection, customer plus. So that's, again, where a big difference from the previous year. You approved a new contract which recognized that revenue stream. Also remind you there's not a dollar to be made. Everything's a pass-through. Something we should revisit. LMIG funding, that dollar amount is down, so let me just tell you, and that's another area that normally grew. We get paid by the center line miles, and DOT and their fuel tax collection, a percentage of that is paid by center line for both the municipalities and the county. So it's, I'm appreciative of any additional revenue we get, but that's none that hasn't been glory. And I'll remind y'all that the fuel tax was removed for almost 13 months. And yes, that played a role in how much money was left in the pie to be cut up. So this year, although fuel tax is standing steady, the number of dollars generated on the fuel tax is still off from what it was 2 years ago. Or I said that wrong, prior to COVID. So interestingly enough, that many people aren't out on the roads. So revenue significantly from 1.7 to 1.5, that's a big deal. So expenditures, mayor and council salaries, same thing. That's not an amount that's equal to what we paid out year to date, but it is an amount of our exposure. Does that make sense? So that, you know, that's the way we have to figure it. Administrative staff. So two things to factor in there. Again, that's not an amount that we paid year to date, interestingly enough. I think we're at about, let me just see here. I think we're at about 227,000. But we'd also had to budget for, let's see if I'm right about that. Because Lord knows I can be more wrong than right. Yeah, well, we paid 226,000 year to date. So what's the difference? The assistant manager position, that was budgeted last year. You know, it hasn't come forth at this point, and I know y'all at work at it. So that's the dollar amount. Plus, we can stop and we can talk for just a second, and I'll elaborate on it even more. When we talked to the finance committee, we talked about what increases could be expected for staffing. They gave us some recommendations. We penciled in those numbers, and when we met last week, they arrived at a dollar amount that we'll talk about in just a minute. The other factor is, with that is, we also, and you're going to see that number come up, we talked about an increase in the benefit package, and you'll hear a little bit more on that because it's not on this line item as far as compensation for hours worked, whether that be personal leave or sick leave. So that number's not in there. Muncie Code, if it ever gets done, that's our amount annually. That should be coming mature, I would think, fairly soon. Court costs, interesting number there, $4,800. That again doesn't reflect what we've actually spent year to date, so that's why that number's moved down. But I also remind you, take it back to the other page, you had $2,000 in fines. That's never good. In our current established setup, that'll never be a moneymaker. And Joey, on that one, where we had talked about a court clerk, that wasn't budgeted on that particular item. So just as a note for city service salaries, again, reflect the indication from the finance committee. And so two things are going to happen. You're going to see in city services, that number actually has changed a little bit only because where we associate a particular employee, whether it be water and sewer or whether it be what we call city services, is a little bit why those numbers change. Training city services, not significant. I'll try to stay with the items that are. Code and EMS salary, same thing. That's a salary position for code enforcement. Let's see, liability insurance. You're going to see that number again. So it's proportional with what we pay versus our liability insurance overall. So that's a percentage. And if everybody remembers, $109,000, which is what we're absorbing. Now, I could do it one or two ways, just to let you know. We have 9 equal payments that y'all agreed to make, but this next April in the fiscal year 23-24, we'll have to approve a new liability insurance premium for May 1st. So I did include that. I'm not going to say that I'm right. In other words, we could have reduced that dollar amount significantly, but at the same time, you don't want to find yourself in the position we were this current fiscal year where, you know, we had better than a 60% increase. Let's see, health insurance. That's an example of where we've had only a few employees taking advantage of our health insurance. In this case, now we have 11. That's a significant number, and that, you know, it's a fortunate benefit that we offer. It basically is about $9,200 an employee in addition to what we pay towards their family covers. So when we communicate with the employees, we always emphasize for every person that we put on payroll, the city's committed already $9,200. It's commendable. I think it's one thing that often gets so often overlooked. Engineering public, again, that's a significant dollar difference from what we actually paid this year, but significantly more than what we actually engineered. So the only thing I'm going to tell you on that particular line item is the majority of what should come out of engineering public is items that you didn't foresee. Any capitalized program, like right now you've got on water and sewer, you've got a water line extension on Belton Bridge Road. You have 2 culvert replacements on Carter Street and Chattahoochee, and those will be capitalized. So those don't come out of that $20,000. Let's see what else is significant. So I'm going to turn over to the next page. Your maintenance for vehicle maintenance and what have you. I'm going to suggest to the council that that number is going to continue to move because of the vehicles we're operating. To your credit, you have 3 F-150s, or one of them's F-250. They're over 10 years old. You have gotten your mileage out of them. The longer you keep them on the road, the more maintenance. As a matter of fact, I'd suggest to you that that's my premium maintenance. In other words, the transmission went out on one of the 3 vehicles I just identified. I would probably come back to council and want you to revisit that, capitalize it rather than throwing good money after money. City elections.
Can I stop you right?
Yeah, you can.
You said we have 3 over 10.
3 of our current fleet are over 10 years old.
So should we budget to maybe figure out a replacement,
Yeah.
1 a year for the next 3 years?
So when we finish this operational budget, we will come immediately back to you with what we call a capitalized budget. And that will make recommendations for the next remaining fiscal year, but those are all capitalized now. And then also it'll make a recommendation for what you should do for the next 5 years. So that would lay in a good example of what you just proposed. So city elections, anybody remember what we paid city elections this last time? Joey, you want to remind us?
Yeah.
Yep. So what we think is going to happen here is that because of the proposed T-Splosh, that we'll be able to negotiate a new price. We know we have to pay for the program, and we'll have to pay for some participation. So I don't know if that's a good number yet or not. They haven't communicated anything with you, have they, Joe?
No, but the reason is they're the same thing you just said. They're awaiting the approval of the T-Splosh and assurances that'll be on the ballot.
Yeah. All right, prison labor, the next one that's highlighted is 58,000. It's the same thing. Just a salary reflex. Streetlights, you're gonna hear a lot about from this point forward. So streetlights are reflective. Believe it or not, that's what we don't get reimbursed for. You're gonna see some numbers in there that we do charge some of the subdivisions for, that there's some reimbursement. But what's the big difference? The big difference, unfortunately, is Georgia Power and PSC has approved a minimum 12% increase. And yes, that had a lot to do with the new reactor coming on board. Then I will tell you that effective the 1st of July, they're gonna fuel the last reactor. And that's an automatic increase from Georgia Power. Or there's a reimbursement line. I think that's, for per building is $3.58. But on top of the 12%, my number that I used in developing the budget, was 12%. I think that's just, we'll have to see what PSC allows. But I don't think the new reactor will actually come online, but they'll have the opportunity to recover some of those additional costs. And you're gonna hear about that a lot. So anyway, city annex utilities, that's reflected. Gas and oil, I'm patiently hush my mouth. If anybody wants to tell me what they perceive will happen with gas and oil in the next fiscal year.
They're gonna ride.
I'm inclined to agree. That's probably the most unstable thing we've seen for the last number of years, where the swing goes both ways. Street lights on the, next to the last page, street lights, Mountain View, River Mist, same thing. The increase there is strictly about what we're seeing for Georgia Power against current billing. And then, one of the last items identified on there was special events, and that's railroad days, Christmas in the park and fall festival. And the good news is, or I don't know if it's good news, is what we spent, what we collected this year, because there is some offset in revenue, especially like railroad days. I think we bring in $4,600 and that offsets that cost. But we only spent $12,000, about almost $13,000 this year. And what I would hope would happen in this next year is we're able to utilize every dollar, because that means we can have more events, community events in the city and that sort of thing. So there was a slight reduction for dollar amounts there, but not significant in that sense of the way. And then park maintenance and utilities, no big deal there. Pool building, power maintenance, no big deal there. Family health insurance, by the way, I attribute some of those costs on electrical anyway. It's all about, we put in new units, we put in more efficient units, and hopefully we're getting the benefit of it. Family health insurance, that's a great example of the $36,000 is what we participate, the city does, for those who have family coverage. And where in the past we had 4 participating, we now have 8. Big dollar. Personal leave adjustment. Council contingency, you have approved any council contingency for this year, and I wouldn't recommend one. But personal leave adjustment. So that was an example. I think we can go into a little bit more depth shortly, but the idea initially was to increase personal leave only, and you can use that as an employee. It gives you some more flexibility using personal leave as sick leave or vacation time. So we revisited that, remind everybody with human resources. And they came back with some recommendations that I had to point out and everywhere that come at a cost. So the idea was how much could you adopt in sick leave, and how much could you do with vacation? And Gene, before you get ahead of me, because you and I have had this discussion, that would be an annual cost. So when we, at this point in the game, we're not talking about does that carry over into the next year, because it does. That will be a cost for the next year's fiscal. But that's not the question today. But I will tell you that what was proposed by the committee and what I came back to the finance committee on are not one and the same. As much as I would have liked to make all the expectations and hopes of that Human Resources Committee met, that's only a fraction. That increase will allow them segmented amount of sick leave, only a minor scale improvement in their personal leave they could use for vacation time. you're gonna see that number come up again. Depot staffing and maintenance, that's actually a part-time position. We've advertised, hopefully we've got a decent candidate for it. At the end of the day, you have a total expenditure of general fund matches the revenue.
On the personnel leave, that is what we're currently,
No, that is an addition. We were able to increase sick leave, proposed, this is for your decision, one additional week. And then because it's a formula we use for vacation leave, and it depends, or that's what we call it now, that depends on the years of service. The example was, if you remember, I'll take it back, from 6 months to 2 years of service, that's 1% formula. From 2 to 5 is another percentage formula. From 5 to 10 is another percentage. And then from 5 to, I can't remember the number on the top of my head, but 5 to 15, that's a max amount. So we were able to, percentage-wise, able to increase those only slightly, as well as that 1 week's. So the way to look at it on sick leave is, it is a cost. You have to assume your exposure is there. That's what. That makes sense.
I just to make sure I was
Good.
clear on it. So it's what we're doing now.
And I gave everybody a sheet.
Yeah.
Y'all should have had, and we can go into that a little bit more depth as well, because I want everybody to understand. Now, I was disappointed, because I know what your objective was, but it's a matter of what we can afford. So why don't we stop for just a second and say, so the law says that you will have a balanced general fund for operation. That's what's reflected here. So, some would argue, this is where all y'all applaud, not having property tax is a good thing. I think, Mr. Mayor, you started the meeting out by saying no property tax. That's true. I will just tell you, when we're experiencing the cost we have, you're going to hear more about that in water and sewer too. It is a very difficult task. I kind of relate it to, if you don't have all the tools, you may be disappointed with what you can accomplish. And that's kind of an example of what we'd like to do on the benefit side of the equation, what we can afford to do and what we'd like to do. Reality is they become two different things. That's the challenge I think we all face. You want me to go into water and sewer now? Or you want to stop on general fund?
Let's go ahead and keep going to.
All right, so water and sewer on that page, so we have a budget of $1,043,000 versus the previous year of $928,000. So there's going to be some significant differences here, and I say significant because we're not going to have some of the revenue streams that we've enjoyed. Go ahead and jump ahead and say that has more to do with tap fees, has it to do with anything else. So as we forecast that, penalties, interestingly enough, we don't see any significant change. Water revenue, as you know, we've talked, and we have a case study all the way back from 2019, 2020, that we've seen our rates. And what needs to just stay ahead of the game. And I'll remind everybody in the room that one consistency we've had, which has been a compliment, it's one of those double-edged sword, it's how consistent we've been in what we charge versus what we expend. Well, I'm going to tell you, in the water and sewer department, it has been a nightmare. And a lot of it has to do with aging infrastructure that we've experienced. Y'all have heard all too many times. I've come in and told you about the wastewater treatment plant being 12 years old, and you'll see some budget numbers that reflect that. But maintenance is going to continue as that facility grows older. Things are wearing out. And we've experienced some of that in capital. Interestingly, in water revenue and sewer revenue, we had proposed that you adopt a 5-year program for increases annually for water and sewer, so then we can do a better job of projecting, which Tony, I know you have an interest in, and obviously Denise, you expressed an interest just a minute ago in expanding what you can do over the next 5 years. That's what we need to continue to do. And this number here reflects a rate increase that y'all will have the opportunity to adopt over a 5-year plan, and we probably can revisit that as early as July, if not finalized in August. So those numbers are reflective as well as the increase in usage that we see. Water tax, so what's the number on water and sewer tax, or what we call TCRs, and why are they so significantly different? I'll remind you, we budgeted $125,000 for sewer tax and collected $390,000. I love to be wrong, especially on that one. The bad news is when you look at the inventory that's available out there to be built in this fiscal year, we're not seeing anywhere near those numbers. And, you know, accelerates, but even on some of the projects, you know, you approved the Moss family, we have 19 homes that are coming on board with, Norton, on the other side of the railroad tracks. Waterford Glen is about 100% built out. They're probably trying to start building some basic units. And then everything else right now, I would say, is still conceptual. And if they started it tomorrow, it'd take them 6 months to come up out of the ground before they'd ever have infrastructure in place to even consider any home building. So that's why that number is significantly reduced. It doesn't mean that I feel I was going to say it's not, I'm not silly, didn't recognize how wrong I was last year. I just hope I'm right this year. Boring costs, that's what fees, engineering, reimbursement, we charge interest income, same type of thing. That's money we've enjoyed this year. We think there's more opportunity in this next fiscal year. Meter replacements reflective the foresight the council did in allowing us through the years to recover those dollars monthly instead of charging everybody $300+ every time their meter fails. So we experience that cost. Miscellaneous revenue, not a big deal. So having lead, what does that mean? I'm sorry about my abbreviation. That's lead shape. And where we budgeted $15,000 for revenue, the agreement we have with Habersham County government is they will agree to take our sludge, we pay for that, and we'll agree to take their leachate. Well, they have found a value now with someone else to take their leachate, so they're not taking advantage of it. I think we've only taken leachate from them in this current fiscal year 4 times. And that's good. It still works for them. They're finding a better avenue for leachate. So we're not going to be dependent on those dollars amount. But when you hear the sludge dollars that we're paying, you'll see that there's still a significant value. So we turn over to expenditures on the next page, again reflective of salaries and indication from the finance committee on the increase. Health insurance. So what's the difference there? Well, that we adjusted where the employee is being paid from. So we're charging only 4 employees against their health insurance. And all those others have been moved into the general fund. Workers' compensation, love to tell you that's the number you saw again in the general fund. So for us, just to tell you how that works, it's reflective of the type work you perform, and they actually rate that. And then, which is one of the reasons why we change who gets charged for water and sewer, because that's actually a higher rating. And the other example is it also has to do with your payroll. So every year, annually, they come in and audit our payroll, and then we get an adjustment annually. So that's why that number isn't significantly changing this year, because we made some significant changes. Maintenance on wastewater treatment plant. This is another one of those crystal ball deals. So, I mentioned earlier, your plant is 12 years old. You're going to hear us talk about water as well. So you're going to continue to experience more costs, and we need to be ready for it. I think one thing we do very well with our entire system is we don't Band-Aid anything. We fix it one time and we hope that we'll be done with it. Y'all heard, we had Friday, we lost the Victoria well pump. And 12 years later, so we got 12 years out of that pump, bless us. But we had the foresight, y'all all get to take credit for this. We had the foresight to buy a pump for Victoria Lane about 7 months ago and one for the Oconee well. Why did we do that? Because historically, that's how long they last. So, and if you remember, Mountain View well number 2 went out 9 months ago. Everybody remember that? And we had to air freight one in from California because nobody keeps any inventory. And so, thank goodness we had the foresight. By the way, the pump was installed this morning. We have a sanitation requirement. We go through and we'll bleed that well back into the system again tomorrow. Everything's right. That's an example where, you know, we want to fix and repair, absolutely, but we want to do it where we know the best dollars being spent. That's a great example, and you're going to see that as we go through the entire budget. One of the things that I skipped over, I should have mentioned, at the direction of the committee on software support and hardware, that's actually kind of a misnomer. You see that in the general fund, in the water and sewer fund, that's primarily for software. Y'all have already approved the hardware, which I call on Dave, somebody's laptop, that me, it's bit the butt dust. And, you know, as you know, they were supposed to have the install late April, early May, and we're still sitting here waiting. So that dollar amount that's a capitalized expense we're putting in there. I failed to mention that earlier, so we'll go back down the list on chemicals, water. So here's where we suffer on all the chemicals. I've had as much as, y'all have had, as much as a 60% increase in chemicals, you know, between our wastewater treatment plant and our water system. So let me differentiate between the two. The good news, I contradict myself here, Joey. Don't raise your eyebrows when I say this. We call our waste treatment plant non-chemical, but we use 2 chemicals primarily in treatment. One is a caustic agent that we use to control the pH as it comes into the plant. You want the perfect pH because you want those microorganisms to live in actually want somewhere around 7.6 on pH. And the caustic agent allows us to buffer that so we stay within those limits. And then we use an item that's called PAC. And PAC, I'll remind you, helps us to remove or capture phosphorus. And when you look at our permit, we have one of the key entities in there is phosphorus removal. And with all the treatment we do, this is an assurity when we use phosphorus in the plant. So it's kind of acts like a magnet to any more of the solids that would be in there make up phosphorus. So that's 2 items. We use a 3rd item in the belt press when we squeeze all the water out of the sludge. I know everybody's going to have dinner, so I won't elaborate on that too much a little later. But that actually helps us some. Between those items, when we say we're a non-chemical plant, when you look at most operational plants, they use a tremendous amount more chemicals. Chlorine is usually a bigger factor in a lot of plants, whether it be gas or liquid. So unfortunately, the way our plant operates, we don't experience that. So when this past year, when we had the challenge with ammonia, we threw everything but the kitchen sink at it to resolve it. So that's certainly one of the costs we experienced in chemical costs. But our PAC went up as much as 42% over a period of 3 months. Our caustic agent went up right at 61%. Now, I think that was a supply and demand issue, but we've been able to back off those numbers. But that's one of those things where you just don't have control. When I say you don't have control, number of vendors in the state is, we're down to 4 that we can buy chemicals from. And that's a tough position to find yourself in. Like in this particular past year, where the product wasn't available on the market, you had to pay. That's really what we ran into. So we're seeing some stabilization, is why you see that number come down. But you're still going to see some of those numbers continue to climb. Let's see, well pump utilities. Interestingly enough, because we have changed that to wells, give you an example for Mountain View. We had that one well pump go down. We were able to replace that 2 weeks later. The second billing that we got on utilities on that well, we saw about a 3% reduction. So what is it? Like how it's all about proficiency or the efficiency of that well. And you can imagine, I mentioned earlier, that our replacement wells are about 12 years. Well, the impeller that actually drives the pump, well water back up, it was almost disintegrated on Mountain View 1 when we pulled that out. And to be exact, one of the reasons why we say you plan for that replacement, why we were fortunate enough and y'all were good to allow us to purchase and put those on the ground. So we would see even more dollars there. Water line supplies. Again, this is all operational. Water meters, that's reflective of the dollars we're paying. By the way, that costs. I know we want to continue to explore whether or not that's the meter for our future, but as we sit today, with the rates we have available, that's a tough decision. Chemicals and wastewater treatment plants, we hope that we're right on that number, so it is supply and demand. Lab supply is not a big deal. Wastewater treatment plant. But I emphasize that. We had estimated this year, I should have said this earlier, for this fiscal year, that we would see about a 7% increase in Georgia Power. And that comes to be true. I mean, that's the good news. The bad news, we did see some increase, but only in the last couple of months. The bad news is that our consumption on utilities certainly is never going to go down. But where we figured on 7%, now we're looking at 12%. And an example, where we budgeted $40,000 for the wastewater treatment plant, year to date, we've only spent about $33,000. We'll end up being around $36,000. So a little lower than what we projected. But then when you look at the number this year, we're up to $46,000. It's a big user, significant, but a big factor overall for us when you factor that number in. There's a challenge that we're going to continue to see. Administrative service charges, the number we reflected, and just to elaborate a little bit more on that. So when the phone rings here, the majority of our calls are usually utility related. That's where you're seeing that's the cost. So we identify obviously the salaries, obviously software is reflective of that. Majority of our software is utility related as well. And then we have, personal leave adjustment there. We made a note. So why is that not significant? Because you don't have as many employees charged with water and sewer. So that was the dollar amount, was that. Family insurance, under that particular one, we only have 2 employees that are taking advantage of the family adjustment. And then bank charges, not a big deal. Pump station fuel, not a big deal. Gainesville hire. Then GFA, where it's just to remind everybody, where you approve to pay off the loan, we can now do that. Closing out closing out sewer line I, and then we're going to close and pay off sewer line of the original payment. So that number is reflective of GFA of your new payment for the next fiscal year as your monthly payment. So at the end of the day, although you don't have to balance your utility fund, it is reflecting a balanced budget. So now I'll take do my best to answer.
Go ahead.
I would say, kudos. We have a balanced budget, zero out, that's fantastic. So, oh, yeah, absolutely. And it worked. It's cheap, so that's a good thing. But that being said, just more of a, education on my part. Being new to council this year. I just wanted to understand, like, in the general fund, we've got line 52 under the expenditures, which would be street repair, regular maintenance. It's at 20,000.
So that is strictly maintenance, that's operational, that's cold patch, that's how, we replaced 3 culverts this year, small culvert. But that's piping, so that's just strictly maintenance. And it's a great question to bring up, because as we look at what we can do in the future, all those need to be capitalized. And even more so today, we just don't have the flexibility with the general fund on operation.
And so the items that we've discussed in the past would be, planning.
Right, so we identified this year, we were getting bids in $465,000. And we can revisit that again, if T-Splosh changes, but that will be the following. But, because that, should add to revenue opportunities. Yes, it's a good thing you pointed that out. Again, that's strictly operation.
Excellent. The next one that I have is line item 45, holiday decorations. I know that we were talking about, making adjustments to the budget.
Right.
This,
Right, so that can be capitalized.
so those items that we discussed in the past, they would all be paid for, not coming out of this.
Right.
Where there's only $1,000. Then the expectation would be that, once we capitalize and pay for those items, we really wouldn't need that much, and that's why it's a low.
Yeah, very low amount. I'd be shocked if we even had it.
Help me, RDC dues.
So,
What are they?
so Georgia Mountain Regional Development Corporation, it's actually an arm of local government. You may not know that. Legislatively, we pay a percentage back to RDC for their services, and that's done by population.
Okay.
It's a great question. I love it. So,
And that's why funded, and as we get funds, they also need to be funded. And that's our portion to help them exist, right?
Right.
Which I'm very glad. Good.
yes, we are.
So, absolutely. Thank you for answering that.
It's not to keep, I'm doing pretty good, so.
Oh, no, you're doing fantastic.
I'm
You're doing great. Let's see. So number 2, which in the general fund, the payments to retirement benefits, we are reducing from 5,000, and forgive me if you had covered that when you were going through. So I know we're reducing that. Is there a explanation as to why we have?
So we carried over $5,000 from this year we have right now.
Okay.
So that's the dollar amount, and the only thing I would say to you on that amount is it's an option for participation by the employee. So if we don't have enough money to satisfy that in this current year, we would come back to the council and say we've had more participation. They can participate up to 3%, or they can actually participate up to 6%. Our match is limited to 3%.
So we haven't paid out in the previous year.
Yes.
So if someone does want to participate,
And we would come back to the council to recognize those dollars.
We'd make an adjustment, and perhaps something else that we
And it's
can.
actually something we would like to revisit this year, but not something that would be part of this budget.
Okay, excellent. You covered several of these. Oh, Item 17, engineering public. You had mentioned that we were talking about culverts and things like that. So we did.
Those capitalized items, I was,
I know we increased, that particular line, item, number 17. So we're confident that we shouldn't be maxing out that particular item.
well, here's the challenge that I have. This is kind of like guessing what gas. So the Moss family property, as you know, y'all through this past year, well, we have a new group that apparently is exploring bringing that item in, and I have a meeting with them next week to begin to talk about engineering on that property. And to do that, I'm gonna bring in Rent McDuff, and they're gonna sit in on that meeting as an example. And those are, I'll give you another one, sensitive an issue. I'm not trying to stir the pot. Norton properties, we all know the Norton schoolhouse property is one thing, but as you know, they proposed 14 more units, and that isn't on our table yet. But when they do come in, that would be an item that would go and we would charge back to under general fund, under engineering.
Yes, and I agree, because I know each one of those projects that you mentioned, looking at the map, of course, is definitely going to be something we'll have to address with them
Yeah.
regarding, drainage runoff.
Right, so when I get a set of plans, and I've got 5 on my desk up here right now, I have a checklist that I use, but anything from the engineering perspective, that's also reviewed by our engineer as well.
Question on line item number 24. Could you explain a little bit about what that is?
City annex and improvement,
Mm-hmm.
so this is the city annex next door.
Okay. Yeah. That explains all.
I told you I'm bad about it. Yeah. You can ask 2 or 3 times, it's okay if you can't remember, I'm bad about using acronyms.
No worries. Hey, like I said, and I mean, you've got to keep it all straight. Let's see. Here, got a note for. Let's see. It was. That was correct. You talked about city election number 30. I think I'm good with that one. I may have questions later about, that's with the prison labor. Just curiosity of what all is included in that and how we allocate that. But that's a different meeting altogether. Yes, sir.
Oh, is that? Pretty good. Strictly your salary, especially with deadline.
Oh, here.
Especially his salary.
Okay. No, that gives you the information I need. Yeah, thank you. Looking at, you already explained the city annex to us, so now I can answer the next question.
Yeah, I can see how I agree on that.
Yeah. The special events, what was we covered Railroad Days, Fall Festival, and what was the
Christmas in the park.
Christmas in the park. Okay.
And so we've got a folder in there that has proposed any number of other community events, maybe not to the size or magnitude of Railroad Days or Christmas in the park, but certainly one-day events that if we bring the downtown manager back on, I think that's what we want to do throughout the year. Matter of fact, the suggestion that's carried through year after year is, it'd be nice to have at least one, in good weather, 1 to 2 day events. And some of those could be inexpensive. I mean, they really can. This past year, if you remember, we had the bubble day where we brought in and had the bubble machine and you come out and blow. Those are the type of things that are inexpensive, but yet draw good community participation.
The next item I had was item 74. It's a multi-part item or line item. It's got several items in there. was just curious. It covers quite a bit, so I'm thinking,
You said item 74?
well, yeah. Item 74, looks like there's a couple of spaces. Like, you look at like depot paying maintenance and overtime. Yeah, the depot staff.
Oh, depot staffing, I'm sorry, I didn't have. Yeah, so that is a part-time position,
Mhm.
which we estimate to be 27 hours a week at a set dollar amount. That actually would not include any increase in salary. And when we say maintenance and overtime, that person not only will help us, with business development downtown business development, depot rental, but also they would be responsible for setting up the room and those type of things. Well, right now, we're experiencing that cost internally.
So that was that's the HR committee's discussion. The other position that was.
Right. And that hadn't changed, that dollar amount hasn't changed from when we previously had it funded.
Okay.
As far as number of hours, it being a part-time position.
Okay. I was just gonna move to line, over to utilities for a second. Just a question, we got line item 18 under utilities is tractor repair. And is that a different tractor than
Nope.
what's on line 26 on the general fund?
Right. No difference.
So
And we share that cost between the two.
okay, so yeah, because we're using it for both things, we can keep it in two different, but it's okay. You explained Chifa to me. Let's see. Oh, question, the software. You mentioned software, just general question. I know you're talking about hardware and software, and hardware has been installed. We're still getting there, but, everything is still good.
As far as cost, y'all approve?
Yeah, nothing's really changed on.
No, we haven't got anything. We're having our challenges, So everything you've already approved, which I believe the amount around $26,000 in hardware improvement. That's been capitalized. And like I said, we end up taking that dollar amount, even though we'll experience this next year. You've already approved, those improvements. Now we're just waiting for the vendor to supply the material.
Well, that's all the questions I had. I mean, we had several items in there, the significant increase, 3X increase, the 2X increase. And you explained all of those very well, and I appreciate you doing that. Yeah, there were a couple others, that were, 3 times cost, and I think, yeah, like, mentioned. I wrote the number down, that there's chemicals for wastewater treatment plant, and there's also another line item.
So there's water, with water, for the chlorine.
That's the caustic and the phosphorus.
Well, no, caustic and caustic are for wastewater treatment plant.
Okay.
But you can ask that any number of times, because I don't expect you to remember all this. Big difference between the two. So the challenge we continue to have with, not so much water system, everything's usually reflective, let's put it this way. If we produce 220,000 gallons of water a day, historically, this makes my job pretty easy. We know how many poundage, that's how we measure everything by the pounds, of chemicals we use for the water system. I can do the same thing for the sewer system. So we use how much poundage is on that. It's frustrating because it'd be so much easier if we use it by the gallons. That's not the way they do it, because that's not the way
And I apologize, I did miss one. It's wastewater treatment. Or, I'm sorry, utilities expenditure. It's line item 45, administration surcharge. Is that salaries?
So that's a portion of no.
No.
So that's an administrative cost. So I elaborated on that a little bit. So let me do it again.
Sure.
I want y'all to grasp that. So the example I gave earlier was when the phone rings here, 90% of the time, what we think 70% of the time, it's related to utilities. So what we're doing is we're reimbursing the administrative staff of that cost. We've been doing that for years, but we've been absorbing that cost for years as well, and this is more reflective of. So that's paying proportionally part of the salary for myself, Teresa, and Tangi. And you see it in revenue under the general.
Building. Pay the portion of the administration.
Okay, so
Does that make sense?
it does. Okay.
It's not a rock and Peter to play ball. I wish it was. But I mean, at the end of the day, you know, when the phone rings, and what takes us the most amount of time is dealing directly with utilities, which is not a bad thing. That's what we should do. So, you know, it could be worse. We could be talking about property taxes, which by the way, we get phone calls like that. What are my property taxes? You don't have it. No, I need to know what my property taxes are. We don't have it.
Talking all county.
Yeah.
That's all county.
Or back.
Or back.
Oh, can take care of that.
Yeah, they will. They're doing a good job of it this year, aren't they?
Yeah. All right, Tony.
I'm
All right.
exhausted.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm kind of asked mine as well.
All right,
What's that?
any questions?
No, sir.
Oh, nothing serious. We're showing 3 employees as administrators, are there not 4?
No, you're talking about Amy. So Amy's part-time, so normally what will happen with Amy, good, you just brought up a great issue. Amy's a fill-in, so I've heard this argument, I don't necessarily agree with it. Well, if Amy's here, then you're not having to pay me for it. Well, that's not always true, because, but Amy's considered, you know, it's not a funded position, yes.
We're going to serve the post, is that correct, basically?
Yeah, she's a sub, so if there's a vacancy, you know, that's the idea. But the reason I'm glad you brought that up is because we still experience, and this year is an example of it. If we add, as been proposed, the sick leave element, now I am paying for that employee, even though they're out, and having to pay for, you call it sub, or in our case, Amy. Big difference at the end of the day.
You hit my next question here. We're actually showing 52 weeks for every employee on
You're right.
so they're all getting paid whether they're here or not. That's, so basically the extra that we had.
Well, that would be assuming that they utilize their,
They're getting paid 52 weeks.
yeah, they're getting paid 52 weeks, so that,
That's all.
and I've heard that argument too about, well, if I take 2 weeks vacation, well, I'm still experiencing cost.
Yeah, somebody. So,
Right.
you said that earlier.
Yeah, the majority of our positions, we did that.
Actually, we run short-handed every time, so I would have had
Amen, brother. That's the best word I can come up. You're right. It's a real challenge.
You know, that, my next question. City Services is showing 4 employees. Not 5?
No, it's 5. I agree, so, let me just see, that may be just something we just didn't change up. What line are you looking at? Looking under salaries?
Yeah. Your sheet here. Your sheet was,
Oh, on your sheet, I'm sorry. So, let me pull that up in front of me so I can sound more intelligent.
42 sewer report, I thought. I can name it. For the wall, you know, we'll walk this, but I haven't found that out.
Are you looking at this page?
No.
Let me see what page it is. Oh, so that hadn't been updated since I made that. I took these numbers. I can't update that. So I can't, yes, there's 5 employees.
On city services.
Right, city services. So there should be 1, or,
Five plus the new one.
right. And then that's what,
That's the name, that's why,
Yeah.
that's why I'm asking.
that's right. Okay.
All right. Wastewater treatment plants.
So 4, so current, that what we're charging. Remember, we're charging part of that to wastewater treatment.
Part of,
But we have 2 employees over there and we're adding a new position.
So we're showing 3 this year, so I'm asking.
Right. Yeah. I can adjust that to reflect.
I just,
Yeah.
I said, the name of my name up here, so.
Yeah,
So we
I
have
got you.
Endeavor and Charity still over there, is that,
Yeah.
I'm trying to put names in these numbers.
Well, and I can give you a sheet with the names on it. It's something that we normally don't talk. No, you could.
It's my information on this.
No, that's good. Great question.
I think I've just answered all my questions.
Okay, now it's Gene, sir.
No, you said he didn't have any. Yeah, I went last.
I didn't,
You can see, I went last. I did it on purpose. We're out of questions. So I guess my questions got out here before.
Amen.
we done.
So now we're going to
Some of us have been praying on this all the whole time.
remind everybody that there'll be a public hearing next Monday night, 6 o'clock. And then we'll vote on it on the 19th at 7 o'clock. And
That would be your earliest.
I'm still reading it today, but something.
Oh, okay.
From what I've seen here, it was good.
Yeah.
So, but that being said, I guess we can, what's going on?
Let me let y'all know that I will be here next Monday. We've got Bible school at church next week, so I will not be here Monday.
You've heard,
But I will pull it up and watch it.
you've heard it, but,
Yeah.
all right, I guess. I think we've accomplished our agenda, if I get anything else to say. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Adjourn. I'll give a motion over Gene, second by Brian, to adjourn, all in favor, aye. Adjourn. Adjourn. Yes.